Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. This is the podcast where we say the things that you're thinking, but maybe have not said out loud just yet. And today we're giving you another weekly roundup of stories that had the internet talking, spiraling, arguing, and in some cases, fully losing touch with reality. This is your quick reset, your what actually happened versus what TikTok told you happened, with a little bit of context, a little bit of perspective, and obviously a lot more attitude. We're getting into the Chick-fil-A drama that wasn't even real, but still managed to cause some chaos, the Philz Coffee Backlash that somehow turned a pride flag into a full cultural debate, a deeper dive into the NSPM7, which who even knows what that is, I'll let you know, and why the language around it actually matters more than you think. And then we're closing it out with a conversation that's a little more nuanced and a little more uncomfortable about identity, politics, and the very real loneliness that some people, specifically the gays, are navigating when they're part of MAGA. I know it's heavy, but this episode is a mix. It's light at times, it's heavy at times, it's informative, it's a little sarcastic, and hopefully it helps you feel a little less overwhelmed by everything that is coming at you online this week. And before we get into it, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _HotAirPod for more content, clips from the show, behind the scenes moments. You can also head to hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and topic suggestions. Now, take a breath. Stop believing everything that you read on your timeline. I'm going to clarify some of this for you. And let's hit it. Part 1, the Chick-fil-A drama. Let's start with something that absolutely took over the internet this week, and I know you highly likely saw it because I saw it approximately 17,000 times on my timeline before I even had coffee, okay? The Chick-fil-A BS, or what I like to call a perfect example of how the internet will collectively spiral over something that is not actually happening and shouldn't be a surprise. So here is what went down. There was a rumor circulating everywhere, TikTok, Instagram threads, your aunt's Facebook page, whatever, all claiming that Chick-fil-A had basically responded to Backlash in some kind of pride-related situation in a way that had people either outraged or weirdly defensive, depending on what side of the internet that you landed on. And naturally, people were running with it, like fully committed, think pieces, outrage posts. I'm never eating there again. Actually, this proves they've changed, all of it. The internet was doing what the internet does best, which is reacting first and asking questions, well, asking questions never. And here's the issue. The claim itself isn't necessarily true. Well, I guess straight up, it's just not true. Fact-checking sources came out and were like, hey, just so everyone knows, this viral claim about Chick-fil-A responding to Backlash in this specific way didn't actually happen. It's either misrepresented, taken out of context, or completely fabricated. And this is where I need us all to pause for a second, because this is not just about Chick-fil-A. This is about how quickly we all collectively will accept something as fact if it fits the narrative that we already believe. Again, no matter what side of the aisle you are on. Let's pause for a moment and we'll explain what happened, because I guess I need to give you that context if you haven't seen it. So Chick-fil-A basically said that they weren't going to celebrate Pride, but they're not going to, for lack of a better term, demonize those that do. Just because they're not putting up Pride flags and having like a Pride event and taking part in Pride season doesn't mean that they are actively, oh God, why do I always do this? Why don't I just read you the actual statement? Okay. So this is what they said. We are proud to protect our values and stay grounded in what we believe. Respect for others does not require us to celebrate or endorse every message or movement. We will not change who we are to appeal to the crowd, and we will not compromise our beliefs for approval. Our position is simple. We will remain respectful, but we will also remain true to our principles. There's so much to take from that. On one end, yes, Like, if you are, I guess, anti-gay, and we know Chick-fil-A, if you don't know, they're a very religious company, just like Hobby Lobby. They love their Bible and they love Jesus. All the power to them. I'd rather them put out a statement like this than completely demonize the queer community and say, like, absolutely not. We would never support Pride because the gays are all going to burn in hell and it goes against everything we believe in. Like, they could have said something else very much harsher, right? But on the other end of the spectrum, they're still saying that they are going to support their values. This is still kind of, segregating the queer community. So wherever you are on the aisle, like however you read into this statement and this message, you can find points that are going to back you up, whether you're pro gay or pro Jesus. So, as I was saying, Chick-fil-A has a history. They've been in controversy cycles before, especially around queer issues. So, when something like this pops up, people are already primed to believe it. It doesn't even have to be fully accurate, it just has to be believable. And once it feels believable, it spreads. So, the rumor basically, depending on what Instagrams you're looking at, is that Chick-fil-A has said that they do not support Pride and they never will. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you're more on the right or you're religious, it's saying that we will accept people and respect their values, but not celebrate them. But the media, as per usual, just ran with these two narratives, depending on which media you're listening and reading and watching, and like really amped it up. So when people are seeing this statement, nobody's checking sources. Nobody's asking where it came from. Nobody's like, hey, is there an actual statement, right? They're just reading these headlines. It's highly likely that people did not go in and read the statement. It's just vibes. Like we're running on vibes and screenshots maybe and the comment section. And then suddenly you've got thousands, sometimes millions of people reacting to something that didn't necessarily happen. And it's a bit confusing, but there's really isn't any clarity here. But it's wild when you really think about how we all just take this narrative and a headline and start resharing and reposting, because we're not even arguing about facts anymore. We're arguing about interpretations of misinformation. We're having full emotional reactions to something that could or could not have happened and then building these entire conversations around it. But this specific situation is such a good example of how quickly things escalate. So this is another great example of how you have one group that's ready to cancel another group that's ready to defend, and both sides are operating on sort of an incorrect premise. Like nobody was actually grounded in what is truth. And again, the statement is a bit vague, but that's where it gets exhausting. It creates this constant cycle of outrage, and that's not even rooted in our reality. It's like we're emotionally reacting first and then fact checking later, if we even fact check at all. So you end up with a version of reality that's kind of loosely based on truth, but not actually accurate. And again, this isn't just about Chick-fil-A. It's about how we consume information now. Like I did a whole episode last week about the misinformation surrounding the draft and men ages 18 to 25 being automatically drafted into the army. The army? Yeah, the army. And the internet exploded, and they were saying that Trump was just drafting everyone. And while I don't like Trump, I had to dive down that rabbit hole and get the facts. And it's such a great example of how sharing things without doing your research is going to lead to confusion, misinformation, and us just fighting with each other. So many people commented on one of the posts that I had commented on, saying, like, I did an episode on this. I clarified a lot of it. This is not exactly true. And some people were like, yeah, he's right. It's not true. Like, these are the facts. And other people were like, why do you support Trump? Saying that he's drafting everyone into the army, and just like really two ends of the spectrum. I saw it firsthand. It was actually I found it interesting and entertaining, but some people might not. So we're scrolling fast, we're reacting fast, we're sharing fast, and rarely pausing to ask, is this real? And all in all, whether Chick-fil-A is going to support LGBTQ plus issues or not, A, that's the least of our problems. Like Chick-fil-A, fast food, you want to eat that anyway? And B, they have always been a religious group. Hobby Lobby, the same. They're not open on Sundays. I would like to go shopping there on Sundays. Do I still shop there? Yes, because it's affordable. I think we have much bigger fish to fry. If you do not want to support a cause because they are very religious and they are not supporting our cause as the queer community, don't eat at Chick-fil-A. Like, they're going to be rich anyway, and we're going to be here fighting for our rights. That's the end of it. And get your facts straight. Read more than just a headline, do your research. And we're kind of sticking with the food theme today because we are moving on to another story. We're talking about the backlash surrounding Philz Coffee and pride flags, which somehow turned into another full-blown cultural moment about identity politics and whether or not a coffee shop can simply exist without being a battleground. So, here's what actually happened with this whole Philz Coffee debacle. Actually, hold on. Part 2. The Philz Coffee debacle. So, several coffee shops in California, including Philz, found themselves in the middle of controversy after displaying pride flags. That alone should not be shocking. It's 2026. Pride flags exist. Businesses show support. This is not new information. And yet, the reaction to it felt like we're reliving the same argument that we've been having for years, just slightly repackaged with new headlines and more online commentary. On one side, you have people who are upset that businesses show visible support to the queer community. The argument usually leans into the idea that companies should stay neutral, which is always interesting because neutrality somehow only becomes a concern when the support is for marginalized groups. No one's asking for neutrality when a company celebrates the 4th of July or puts up Christmas decorations. Suddenly, neutrality is very important when it's a rainbow flag and not a fucking wreath. On the other side, you have people who support these displays, but are also becoming increasingly skeptical of them. There's this growing conversation around performative activism, where companies are seen as capitalizing on pride for branding purposes without necessarily backing what support that means, what that support is in a meaningful way. So even within the groups that support queer visibility, there's tension. It's not just about whether the flag is there, it's about what it represents and is the business even doing anything about it. So now you have a situation where a coffee shop puts up a pride flag, and instead of just being a simple show of support, it becomes this layered, complicated debate about politics, authenticity, and corporate responsibility. And somehow your morning iced coffee is now part of a larger cultural war. That's dramatic. The war. What's fascinating about this is how quickly it escalates again. A single image or report that circulates online became huge. Some are calling for boycotts, others are rushing to defend the business. And suddenly, this one location becomes symbolic of something much bigger than itself. And again, this isn't about coffee, just like it wasn't about chicken. This is about what people project onto it. And obviously, I love the pride flag. The pride flag represents inclusion and visibility and progress. For others, it represents a political stance, not that being fucking queer should have been politicized. For another group, it represents corporate branding trying to align itself with social movements. Everyone is looking at the same symbol, but they're seeing completely different things. I mean, if you want to brand the pride flag and you want to make some money off of us, like, listen, we make the world go round, okay? Gays are the ones who have money. It's been reported that same-sex couples have the highest household income. Like, hello, we hustle, we bustle, we bust our fucking asses. Maybe I shouldn't say that. We work hard and we have dreams and we make things pretty and we bring in the money, honey. And these people aren't even arguing about the same issue. They're arguing about what they believe that the issue represents. And those interpretations are shaped by completely different life experiences and perspectives. So it doesn't become about coffee and the pride flag. It becomes about your upbringing, who you know, what you've experienced in life. And there's also something else that happens here that's worth paying attention to, which is how businesses are increasingly being expected to take a stance on social issues, whether they want to or not, and whether it aligns with their brand or not. There's this pressure to signal where they stand. And once they do, they open themselves up to criticism from all sides. And when you really boil it down, like, I would love for every business to be like, yes, pride flags everywhere and to feel supported. But when it's, a mom and pop shop or somebody's whole entire existence is wrapped up, their income, their family, their livelihood in a business, and they, depending on where they're living, they could potentially lose all of that based on supporting any marginalized group, whether it's like a No Kings protest or the Pride flag or Black Lives Matter, like anything could completely blow up their livelihood. So I imagine that's got to be terrifying and stressful, which is probably why this podcast has no sponsors, because the shit I talk about, I mean, BetterHelp, I do talk about therapy, but like BetterHelp's not going to be like, hey, go give this ad to this anti-Trump raging homosexual. They really should, though. They really should. And that risk that companies might have to take, that risk turns into backlash when they do take a stance. I mean, no matter what they do, they're kind of screwed. What stands out to me is how predictable all of this is. This has happened before, and it will happen again. A company shows support for social issues, people react, the conversation spiral, and eventually it fades until the next company does the same thing. We saw it with Target completely pulling all of their Pride merchandise. It's like formulaic at this point. But every time it happens, people are acting like they're experiencing it for the first time. And I just say, if you don't like the Pride stuff, don't buy the Pride stuff. If for some reason I don't want to celebrate Christmas because I'm not Christian or religious or believe in Jesus, I'm not going to, even though I love decorating and I love Christmas shopping. So you know what I'm saying, though. Just pick and choose your lane, stay in your lane. Don't go to the places that make you feel uncomfortable. And also, think about why they're making you feel uncomfortable. Like, I'm not offending anyone by being a fucking homosexual. Nobody has to deal with me. That's not true. Everyone has to deal with me. I do have a podcast after all. But if you don't like the gays, just walk on by. Just like when I was at the airport the other day in San Diego, inside the fucking airport, there was a booth promoting the Bible and Jesus inside the airport, which isn't that like federal grounds or something like that? You can't even bring weed into the airport. Technically, you're not supposed to because it becomes a different jurisdiction once you are inside of the airport. Yet you're throwing Bibles at me? I don't think so. But what did I do? I just walked by. I mean, my thought initially was, ooh, this would be an interesting segment for like the pod. I should talk to these people and ask them, the fuck are you doing in the airport? I didn't, but I just ignore them and I just walk on by. Anytime someone has a pamphlet or shoving the Bible in my face, trying to sell me the good Lord, where the good Lord split them, like, no, I just keep walking. So do the same with the pride flag. Ignore it. Now, let's bring it back to Philz Coffee because I do want to read the statement or part of it that they put out. So they said, at Philz, we have always believed everyone who walks through our doors deserves to feel welcome and safe. And that belief is at the core of everything we do. This is a change in how our stores look, not in who we are. That rubs me the wrong way, even more so than the Chick-fil-A statement, because you want everyone to feel safe. A pride flag represents safety and inclusion and love and everyone, right? So removing that now makes the queer community not feel safe because you are catering to making Christians or people that are homophobic or that think that being gay is a political statement. You are catering to them and making them feel safe by removing the pride flag. So stating that that is just a change in how your stores look and that it's not who you are. That's a very clear statement. When you remove something in an attempt to make another group that quite frankly is the majority, straight, cis, white, bigots, MAGA, homophobic, racist, you're making them feel comfortable because they felt uncomfortable by the pride flag. You see what I'm saying here, Philz? Now I'm getting heated up. Now that I'm really processing this out loud, I think it's bullshit. I take everything back nice I said. But when you remove these things, you're making a statement. Just like when the Trump administration slowly but surely goes after the 1%, the trans community, you're making a statement. It's something that isn't even a problem, but you're creating a problem. And quite frankly, all this hoopla, that's a fucking lot for a cup of coffee. I will make mine at home. And our next story, we're shifting gears a little bit because this story is less about internet chaos and more about something that feels quieter on the surface, but has much bigger implications. Part 3, NSPM 7, the fuck is that? So this is about a policy called NSPM 7 and the concerns around how it could be used to target nonprofits and activist groups, particularly those on the left, under the umbrella of domestic terrorism. That already sounds intense, and it is, but let's break it down in a way that actually makes sense without turning this into a law school lecture, because I don't have any time or patience for that today. So NSPM 7 is a national security memorandum that focuses on countering domestic terrorism. And on paper, that sounds like something most people would agree with. Preventing violence, protecting the public, addressing real threats, all of that is important. The issue is not the existence of a policy aimed at domestic terrorism. The issue is how that policy can be interpreted, applied, and potentially expanded in ways that go beyond its original intent. So what organizations like the ACLU are pointing out is that the language and framework within NSPM 7 could allow for a much broader definition of what qualifies as a threat. And when definitions get broader, they also get more subjective. That's where things start to get a little uncomfortable because subjectivity, national security is not exactly known for being applied evenly. So now you have this concern that groups that are engaged with activism, protest, or advocacy could be monitored or labeled in ways that align them with security threats, even if their actions are non-violent. And that doesn't mean it's happening across the board right now, but it certainly does open the door for it to potentially happen. And this is where that comparison, first thing I thought about was Russia. That's where the comparison comes in, which might sound very dramatic at first, but there's a reason that I am making that comparison. In Russia, I mentioned this before, the government has labeled LGBTQ plus organizations and activists as extremist. Not controversial, not political, not even just oppositional, but extremist. The label carries legal consequences in Russia. It justifies surveillance, restrictions, and in some cases, arrests. A lot of cases, arrests. So it reframes that whole entire movement as a threat. So the United States is not Russia, although sometimes it feels like it. The systems are different, the legal structures are different, and the context is different. That distinction is also important, but what people are pointing out is not that the two are identical, but it's the language used to categorize the groups that can shift over time. And once that shift happens, it becomes much easier to justify actions that previously would have seemed very out of the scope of reality. And language sets the tone for policy. So if something is framed as activism, it exists in one space. If it's framed as a threat, it exists in a completely different space. The actions themselves might not change, but the way they are interpreted does. And that interpretation affects how those actions will be treated. And that's why this is very important. It's not about assuming the worst case scenario immediately, but it's about paying attention to how these frameworks are built. When policies are created with broad or flexible definitions, they can be applied in ways that extend beyond their original purpose, especially over time or under different leadership. And history, because history is important, has shown that this is not a hypothetical concern. There are multiple examples of laws and policies being used in ways that were not initially intended, often impacting groups that were already marginalized or politically unpopular. So, when organizations raise concerns about something like NSPM 7, it's not necessarily about what is happening at this very moment. It's about what could happen if those tools are used differently in the future. And really, honestly, that's where a lot of people tune out because it doesn't feel immediate. It doesn't feel urgent in the same way that a viral controversy does. There's no crazy headline, no single moment that captures everyone's attention. Like, it's certainly more subtle, more technical, and easier to overlook because it sounds really boring. But those are often the conversations that really matter. The ones that we ignore, that slide right under the rug or under the door, or whatever the saying is, those are important to pay attention to. And there's also a broader pattern here around how dissent and activism are viewed. In any society, there's always a tension between maintaining order and allowing space for protest and opposition. That tension is not new. What changes is how it's managed and where the lines are drawn. And when those lines begin to blur, it raises a lot of questions and a lot of things. Not just the line get blurred, but things that are a threat and what's considered legitimate expression also gets blurred. And just like our first two stories, different people are going to have different answers, different beliefs, and different views based on this. And it's going to depend who's making the decisions. If it's a very far right person who's under Trump, which it currently is, they could start labeling LGBTQ plus groups that are not violent or are nonprofits that are just activists that are just out in the streets with signs. They could be labeling that as a domestic terrorist threat. And there's nobody that's going to stop them, frankly. And that's really what makes the comparison to Russia less about direct equivalence and more about, a cautionary example, hopefully just a cautionary example. But it really does show how quickly things can shift when certain labels are applied and normalized and who is making the decisions. So things like this, again, like when you see NSPM 7 or similar policies that you're like, what even is that? It's worth paying attention to, even if it feels a little more complex or less immediate and less engaging than other headlines. Not everything important is going to be viral. Some things are just important. Now, we've got one more little story to get to, and then I'll set you free on this Friday. So, part 4, Gay MAGA. And this one makes you pause a little longer. It's not as simple as outrage or misinformation or even policy. This is far more personal, more psychological, and a lot more nuanced than people are probably going to give it credit for online. This is about being described as the lonely world of gay men who identify with MAGA politics and the experience of existing in a space where your identity and your political alignment don't exactly fit neatly together like a little puzzle piece. Now, before anyone immediately jumps to a reaction, which I know is tempting, it's worth actually sitting in what that means for a hot second, because on the surface, it feels like it's very contradictory, right? You have individuals who are part of the queer community aligning themselves with a political movement that has at times been very openly critical of that very community. That tension is real, and it's part of why that conversation even exists. But what's interesting is not just the contradiction, it's how people navigate it. So I read an article that dives into the experience of these men feeling somewhat isolated, not fully accepted in the queer spaces because of their political views, and not fully embraced in conservative spaces because of their identity. And that creates this kind of in between existence where you don't entirely belong anywhere. And that could be a very specific kind of loneliness. And loneliness, regardless of where it comes from, is something people will try to resolve. And the way they do that might not always make sense from the outside, but it usually makes sense to them internally. That's where this becomes less about agreeing or disagreeing and more about understanding that dynamic. Because identity is not just one thing, it's very layered. It's influenced by environment, upbringing, personal experiences, values, and sometimes even a desire to differentiate yourself from a group that you feel disconnected from. Political alignment can be shaped by a completely different set of factors than sexual identity, and those two things don't always move in the same direction. You can still be a homosexual and be a racist. So when you see someone who identifies as both gay and aligned with MAGA, it's easy to reduce that to a contradiction and just stop there. It's much harder, but more useful to ask how that alignment developed in the first place. And this is a short segment. This is certainly something I would like to dive into deeper, like full length episodes for real. But we're just focusing on specifically what I read in this article. So for some, it might be rooted in economic beliefs. For others, it might be views about government, personal freedom, or cultural values. And in some cases, it might even be a reaction to feeling alienated from mainstream queer spaces, which can have their own expectations around politics and identity. That doesn't erase the tension, but it does explain why it exists. So, what this article highlights is that this tension often leads to isolation. In queer spaces, there can be a sense that political alignment with MAGA is incompatible with the community's values, which can lead to exclusion or criticism. And in conservative spaces, there may be a level of acceptance, but it can come with limitations or conditions where certain aspects of identity are tolerated rather than fully embraced. So these people end up in this position where you're constantly navigating both sides and never fully settled in either. I mean, it would be very hard for me to have a conversation with a gay man and be like, "You love Trump? You're still on that side?" But the reality is that, there's gay men who don't feel like the trans community should be included in the LGBTQ+. I see this all the time. There's gay men that say, they're not part of the scene, they're not a circuit gay. They like to play sports and they come across as quote unquote straight. Therefore, they don't go to the clubs, they don't go to, pride events. But let me just say, the reason you don't go to the club and you don't go to pride events when you are a masculine presenting gay man, you're a gay man who presents as what the world calls straight. You don't have to go to pride. You don't have to go to these nightclubs to find your people because your people are the straight people. Okay. You've never been alienated from those spaces. You've never been in high school and had people shoving you against lockers and tackling you in gym class because you're smaller and gayer and more flamboyant. You were probably the one doing that to others because you were taller, you were more masculine, and that is what you were taught to do. And that's not their problem. But when you are a masculine, tall, gay man who presents as straight, you don't have to find your community because the world is already basically made for you. But that can bring on its own challenges because you're like, where do I fit in? Like, I like to play hockey. I don't know, I spit and I smoke and I'm like white trash. I don't know. But going to queer spaces where people have glitter all over them and their clothes are off and like we're sweating and dancing and have a good time, that can feel very uncomfortable for somebody because that's not the world that they were brought up in. That's not the world that they fit into, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't accept them. I feel like maybe I should save that conversation for future episodes because that could just get real deep in here, but I think you get my point. And also, it just started to rain, so if you hear some funny noises, it is now raining outside. When the MAGA gays and the not MAGA gays come together, like, instead of a nuanced conversation, there's quick reactions. People dismiss, criticize, or mock without really engaging with what's underneath it. And while some of the reaction is coming from very real concerns about policy and impact, it can also shut down the opportunity to understand the human side on both sides. And understanding doesn't mean agreement, and that matters. You can recognize that someone's experience of isolation is real without agreeing with their political views. And you can acknowledge the complexity of identity without ignoring the broader implications of the choices that people make. And holding those two things at the same time is really confusing and really uncomfortable, but it's kind of necessary if you want to move beyond surface level reaction. There's so much to it. It's so much deeper than we can really even understand until we sit across from somebody and have a calm, cool, collected combo. Like, you don't have to agree, you don't have to validate everything, but to understand that there's more going on beneath the surface than what you see at first glance. At the end of the day, this isn't just about politics, it's about people trying to figure out where they even belong. And sometimes that's not as straightforward as we would like it to be. So, if there is a takeaway from today's episode, it's probably this. Not everything you see online is real. Not everything that is real is being framed accurately, and most of the time, the loudest version of the story is not the most complete one. Like this week alone, I saw how fast misinformation can spread, how quickly something small can turn into a full cultural debate, how policy language can quietly shape much bigger conversations, and how identity and belonging are rarely as simple as people want them to be. And the common thread through all of this really is just perspective. It's taking a second to pause before reacting, asking where something came from, what's actually happening underneath the headline, and recognizing that sometimes a situation is more complex than it's being presented. And everywhere should have a pride flag fly. You don't have to be fully formed to have an opinion on everything like immediately. You don't have to jump into every debate. Sometimes just understanding or trying to understand what's going on without the noise is simply enough. And if this episode helped you cut through some of that noise, make sure that you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Head to my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send your topic suggestions. Send this episode to someone who maybe needs a little reality check from their timeline, and I will be back for more Hot Air next week. So take a moment, unplug, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you next Tuesday.